The old fable about the devil's sale. It's interesting, and like most old fables, it has a moral that's worth thinking about. The story goes that Satan was having a sale of his wares. There on display and offered for sale were the rapier of jealousy, the dagger of fear, and the strangling noose of hatred, each with its own high price. But standing alone on a purple pedestal, gleaming dully in the light, was a worn and battered wedge. This was the devil's most prized possession, for with it alone he could stay in business, and this was not for sale. It was the wedge of discouragement. Why do you suppose the devil, valued so highly, actually would not sell the worn and battered wedge of discouragement? Makes you stop and think, doesn't it? I think he prized discouragement because of its enfeebling, demoralizing effect. Hatred, fear, or jealousy may lead an immature person to act unwisely, to fight or run or grab, but at least he acts. Discouragement, on the other hand, hurts him more than any of these. It causes him to sit down, pity himself, and do nothing. Now, this doesn't have to happen, but unfortunately it all too frequently does. Not until we realize that discouragement is often a form of self-pity do we begin to take stock of ourselves and our predicament and decide to act, to do something that will take us out of an unpleasant situation. The answer to discouragement, to self-pity then, is intelligent action. Let me give you an example. Our good friend W. Clement Stone, one of this country's wealthiest and most successful business leaders, formed the habit in the early days of his career of saying, "That's good," whenever anything happened, good or bad. Most of the time, of course, it was something good, but even when he learned of a near calamity, a deadly serious situation that would have sent a lesser man scurrying for cover, he'd smile and say, "That's good." Then, as his associates shook their heads in resigned disbelief, he'd tear headlong into the problem and find what was good in it. And invariably, some element in the situation could be turned to advantage. Now, there are times when misfortunes come down on all of us in bunches like bananas. Yet if we understand that something good can usually be found in almost any situation, we'll go quietly and efficiently to work on the most important part of the problem, the one that can be turned to advantage. When that's taken care of, we can go on to the next part. That's the best thing we can do, and it's the mature way to get rid of discouragement before it gets rid of us. Everyone has days or even successions of days when nothing seems to go right. A large account is suddenly lost. Anticipated plans fall through. It seems as though the sun has gone out. This is the time to take the long-range, intelligent view. Since self-pity or inactivity cannot possibly help the situation, the only rational course to follow is to go after another large account, to make more presentation, to replace those lost sales, to be confident in the knowledge that over the long haul things will average out to our advantage. But even more important, losing an account, being disappointed, or failing to convince others on some point important to us often gives us just the pause we need to ask ourselves, why? Maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe something we're doing, while it isn't exactly wrong, could be done better. Here's an opportunity to improve ourselves and possibly increase our effectiveness in dealing with others. Some of the most successful people I know have, at one time or another, been forced by a stretch of poor productivity to analyze their methods and use of time. Now, a dry spell is no fun for anyone, but it's often the only situation extreme enough to get us to look at ourselves, find out what we're doing, why we're doing it, and whether this is the best possible way it can be done. As Emerson said, when a man is pushed, tormented, defeated, he has a chance to learn something. Here's something else to think about. Discouragement very often comes on the heels of crisis, and it's been said that crises are thoroughfares. We can go either way, up or down. We go up out of a crisis by doing something constructive. We go down by wallowing around in our problems and feeling sorry for ourselves. I believe you'll agree that discouragement, which comes to all of us sooner or later, is a test of nature. Those who refuse to yield to it in time pass through discouragement to the smooth and sunlit seas beyond, and what once seemed to be a storm of such ferocity that it blotted out the whole world is soon forgotten. And we recognize that, though we couldn't see it at the time, whatever it was that seemed so bad was actually for the best in the long run. Whenever you face discouragement, try to keep in mind three vitally important points. First, discouragement is often a form of self-pity, an expensive emotion we can get along very well without. And the most effective antidote for self-pity is intelligent action. Next, within any discouraging situation, there's almost always lurking an opportunity for growth, maturity, and future success. There's something good about it. And finally, discouragement should be kept in its proper perspective. What may at the moment seem like the end of the world won't seem so important in 10 days and won't be very important in 10 months. Take the long-range view, and you can't be defeated by momentary setbacks. The Chinese have a saying that if you live with a disaster for 3 years, it will turn into a blessing. The devil couldn't get along without his priceless wedge, but we can, by realizing that being human qualifies us for some occasional pressure by that wedge, but that we have within us the strength to pull away and use it to our advantage. We'll wind up being a great deal happier and far more successful. The next time you're tempted to feel discouraged about something, try taking the attitude of that business executive we talked about. Simply say, "That's good," and then start finding out what is good about it. This is Earl Nightingale, and thank you.
Back in 1956, I wrote and recorded something we called The Strangest Secret. Without advertising or fanfare of any kind, it outsold all other non-musical, non-entertainment type recordings. It's been heard by millions and millions of people throughout the free world, and in the process created a brand new industry. Learning through listening. On one of these solid-state cassette tape players. This player has revolutionized the learning process. Now people listen in their automobiles while driving to and from work and on sales calls, time that was formerly wasted, on their commuter train with the little earpiece, in the bathroom while shaving in the morning, at the dinner table with the children gathered around the table and the whole family together for a change. This has made a tremendous difference in the business of learning. But getting back to The Strangest Secret, what makes a bestseller? What was there about that recording that caused millions of people to want to hear it over and over again and let their children hear it and play it for their employees and their sales forces? Well, I'm making a talk here today in which I'll cover the highlights and philosophy of The Strangest Secret, and I'd like to invite you to join us, and I hope you find it of some value. I want to tell you the most interesting story in the world. Why a person becomes the person he becomes. Why a little boy or a little girl grows up to be the kind of person he or she becomes. Now, the estimates by the experts in this field are that most of us are using somewhere around 5% of our real potential. Some experts say as little as 1%. It means that we're only giving about 5% of ourselves to what we're doing, to our days, our work, our families, everyone we know, our entire environment. But it also means that we're only experiencing 5% of the fun, 5% of the joy, 5% of the rewards we could be knowing, or less. All the experts are agreed that in each of us, there are deep reservoirs of ability, even genius, that we habitually fail to use. Why? We know that most people desire by nature to succeed. But what is success? What is this word that has become so famous in the world? What does it mean? Most people don't know what success is all about. And since they don't know what it's about, they really don't know where to look for it. Success is really nothing more than the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. This means that any person who knows what he's doing and where he's going is a success. Any person with a goal toward which he's working is a successful person. This means that the boy in high school who's working toward a diploma, or the boy in college toward a degree, is just as successful as any human being on earth, because he knows what he's doing, why he's getting up in the morning, and where he's going. But conversely, if a person doesn't know what he's working toward, what it is he wants, doesn't have a goal toward which he's working, then he must, at least by this definition, be called unsuccessful.
If what we most enjoy is not connected with our work. To accomplish anything, as W. McNeill Dixon writes in his interesting book, The Human Situation, you need an interest, a motive, a center for your thoughts. You need a star to steer by, a course, a creed, an idea, a passionate attachment. Men have followed many guiding lights. They've been inspired by love of fame and love of country. They pursued power, wealth, holiness. They followed Christ, Muhammad, Napoleon. Something must beckon you or nothing is accomplished. Something about which you ask no questions. Thought needs a fulcrum for its lever. Effort demands an incentive or an aim. We need to know our motive. I know mine, I think. Do you know yours? What makes following an idea so interesting are the unexpected paths and byways and windfalls that occur along the way, the serendipitous events that unfailingly come to the person in pursuit of a goal. Serendipity means the faculty of making happy and unexpected discoveries by accident. The word was coined by the British author Horace Walpole, who based it on the title of an old fairy tale, The Three Princes of Serendip. The princes in the story were always making interesting discoveries while on a quest for something else. The secret of making serendipitous discoveries is to make certain we're following a star, a cause, a creed, or an idea. It's the secret of what the uninitiated call good luck. Just as ideas and imagination are the fountain of youth, being on a personal quest absolutely guarantees that unexpected good fortune will come our way from time to time. Whenever you hear of someone being lucky, a little investigation will show that the person is a busy, positive kind, looking for new and interesting ways of doing things. I remember reading that good luck is what happens when preparedness meets opportunity. People who pull in their heads and try to play it safe seldom learn about serendipity. Perhaps they wouldn't recognize it if it sat on their doorstep. The next time you hear someone say, "Don't stick your neck out," observe him closely. Chances are he's a rather dull and uninteresting person with little to recommend him. A lot of boredom and frustration that's connected with work comes from not knowing more about it. The people who find a meaning, a deeper purpose in their work, find themselves deluged by good fortune. I suppose that's why just 5% of the people earn 40% of all the money in the country. There is tremendous opportunity, and if we'd only find a star to steer by, a goal worth working toward, we'll see more of it. What is the star by which I steer my life? A good question to ask from time to time. It may change as we mature and sort out the important from the unimportant, but a person without a goal is like a ship without a rudder. I talked to a class of kids in History of Education in Milwaukee not long ago, and afterwards a couple of fine, serious young men came backstage and asked, "But what if we don't have a goal?" And I suggested that they make the finding of a worthy goal their goal. It seemed to help. Another common seaman, Joseph Conrad, studied and worked his way to become a ship's captain. He later spent the long weeks at sea writing his great classic stories. Serendipity. We can put it to work in our lives whenever we wish. All we need is a quest, an odyssey, which is the name of my boat, incidentally. If you'd like to know more about the interesting subject of motivation, what motivates people today and what doesn't, by all means read the book I mentioned earlier, The Enjoyment of Management by John Price. He points out that motivating people has been with us for centuries. The 5 classic forms of motivation were practiced by such legendary greats as Cleopatra, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, and Moses. And for many centuries, these 5 motivators, pay, direction, discipline, underutilization, and diversion, worked magnificently. Moses crossed the wilderness, Caesar conquered Gaul, and Cleopatra had her wily way. So naturally, these heretofore highly efficient motivators continued into the Industrial Revolution and are still with us today. But do they still motivate? Well, let's see. Pay is income to the person for use as he determines, but he's influenced by a couple of things. Does he have full freedom to use pay in any manner he wants, or must he use all or part of it to fill obligatory demands such as the rent, car payments, the phone bill, and taxes? There isn't as much discretionary income. Pay in most people's minds is their due for the work they perform. It does not tend to change a person's behavior from median to maximum performance. Pay, then, is not a motivator. It motivates membership, and that's all. Money is what the employer uses to attract and hold people. It motivates them to come or to leave an organization, not to perform to the maximum of their ability. Denial of aspirations for independence of action through detailed direction will certainly motivate changes in organizational behavior. Unfortunately, the motivation will take a negative tack, leading to dissension and withdrawal of individual effort. Discipline, the 3rd classic motivator, still works, but it's much more difficult to apply today. The unions, changes in lifestyles, the lesser emphasis on material goals, all have contributed to a weakening of discipline as a motivational force. The biggest problem in our industrial society today, without qualification, is the underutilization of people in the workforce. It is in itself a monumental deterrent to maximum individual productivity. But far worse, it has a relationship with just about every aspect of the work situation: pay, discipline, direction, to cite the motivators we've already discussed, and also the full range of organizational goals, profit, production, morale, and so forth. The major effect of underutilization is turnover, and turnover, as any industrial leader will tell you, is the bane of his existence. The most talented young people, aware of the fact that they're not being fully utilized, quit. The young man has grown up without the problem or frustrations of his older boss who remembers the Depression. He's of a generation unique in sociological history, a generation without substantive problems of personal survival. Often the young men who stay are generally of a less aggressive nature who eventually will extend a minimum of effort, which ultimately becomes fixed. If they're unable to channel their unused abilities elsewhere, they will, according to Parkinson's law, shriek to get the job. And finally, diversion, getting people's minds off the unpleasant job, is fast becoming passé. So the 5 classic motivators that have been around since Moses, Julius Caesar, and Cleopatra are pay, direction, discipline, underutilization, and diversion. But in the rapidly changing world of today, they don't seem to work anymore. John Price tells us about 5 more, the stable motivators, which do. They are growth, achievement, responsibility, recognition, and work nature. First, growth. Growth is of 2 types, organizational growth and self-developmental growth. For a person to feel meaning in his job and thus give to that job the full measure of his ability requires that he sense the opportunity for promotion beyond his present job, organizational growth, and opportunity for the advancement of his own personal competence. He will, of course, sense opportunity only if there are, in fact, recognizable mechanisms for its realization. These mechanisms, quite simply, are discretionary awards, succession planning procedures, merit increase provisions, and personal development programs. 2. Achievement. According to some professionals in human behavior, is the most important of the needs for the organizational member. Unless the person senses that what he's doing is a contribution to a greater goal, that he is doing something that counts, he will very likely produce mediocrity. 3. A sense of responsibility is third of the 5 motivational needs which must be satisfied for maximum job performance. We do not, as a rule, delegate to people the freedom to act as responsible managers of their own jobs. Everybody is a manager if we think of management as involving the coordination of resources. So creating a feeling of importance and responsibility is the job of the manager today, and unless this feeling is created in the individual, one of the important elements will have been lost. 4. Recognition. The 5 most important words in the language are, I am proud of you. The 4 most important, what is your opinion? The 3 most important, if you please. And the 2 most important, thank you. These are all simple phrases, and they're pretty inexpensive ways to recognize individual performance with personal concern. 5, the last ingredient in the high-performance recipe, is work content, the nature of the job itself. Unless the person has a basic liking for the functions, the tasks, the mechanics of the work he performs, he cannot, by any stretch of the imagination, be motivated to perform at his highest achievement level. I don't mean to imply that the person who doesn't consider his work hobby-like is lost, motivationally speaking, but he must be in agreement with himself, if only subconsciously, on the fundamental desirability of what he's doing. No one can induce this last element, it must be there. We've always tended to look outside for the causes and solutions to the problems that confront us, rather than searching introspectively. You don't make an engine run better by polishing the block. Internal care is what counts.
Arctic, they'd see a giant iceberg towering high out of the sea, and it would be moving against the wind. The wind would be blowing this way. The great iceberg would be moving right into the teeth of the wind. And this, of course, frightened the sailors whose ships were powered by the wind, until it was discovered that, of course, only a fraction of the great berg was visible, and that its huge, ponderous roots were caught in the great currents of the ocean. And it was being borne purposefully along its way, regardless of the winds and the tides on the surface. Well, this is what a man needs. He needs his roots deep in a great main stream of his own choosing, and then he'll move along his way, regardless of the winds on the surface of his life or short-term expediency, and he'll get to where he's going. The second word on our checklist might be the word attitude. It's been called the most important word in any language in the world, because it's our attitude toward our world, toward all the people in it, that will determine the world's attitude and all the people's attitude toward us. It's a simple thing. Most of us know it, but we tend to forget it. People will react to us according to our attitude. And our attitude is the greatest gift we can be given. You know, the little creatures of the world were given a wonderful gift by Mother Nature called protective coloring, in which they can blend into their background without being seen. But man was not given this great gift, because man was given an incalculably greater one. Only man has the godlike power to make his surroundings change to fit him, because his environment will change as he changes. A man's environment is a merciless mirror of him as a human being. And if he thinks his environment can stand a little improvement, all he has to do is improve, and his environment will improve to reflect the changing man. Third would be the word think. To think. The highest function of which a human being is capable. It was put pretty well by the great Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Archibald MacLeish in his great play, The Secret of Freedom, in which he has one of his characters say, "The only thing about a man that is a man is his mind. Everything else you can find in a pig or a horse." It's true. And so if we're going to develop something, this is a good place to start. To think deliberately and with a purpose. To spend a little time each day before a blank sheet of paper with our goal perhaps written at the top, and come up with some fresh, new, and exciting ideas. The next point on our checklist you might call the law of laws. That's what Emerson called it, this great old law of cause and effect. That our rewards in life will always be in exact proportion to our contribution, to our service. We all know this, really. We tell our children in Sunday school that as ye sow, so shall ye reap, but we forget that that's true. If a man is unhappy with his rewards, all in the world he's got to do is find ways of increasing his contribution, his service. It's like the story of the preacher who was driving down a country road, and all of a sudden he came to the most magnificent farm he'd ever seen in his life. It was beautiful. And so he saw the farmer approaching the road on his tractor, and so he hailed him, and he said, "My good man," he said, "God has certainly blessed you with a magnificent farm." And the farmer thought for a moment, and he said, "Yes, you're right, he certainly has. But you should have seen this place when he had it all to himself." And the preacher had his sermon for the next Sunday. He realized that all the farmers up and down that road had been given the same land, but one man had made something great out of it. Well, all of us are given the same land. We're given a human life, and each of us can make something great out of it, too, if we want to. The next point might be simply the word truth. Since everything we do has an equal and opposite reaction, unless what we're doing is based on truth, we're building on sand, and it can't stand. The next point would be R&D, research and development. None of us would want to work for a company or invest our money in a company that didn't have a very viable research and development department. That is, pumping a good percentage of its profits back into research and development because its future depends on it. But so does a man's. And you might ask yourself, how much of your own take-home pay have you spent during the past year for materials calculated to make you smarter this year than you were a year before? Calculated to make you a little better, a little bigger as a human being, to perhaps love a little more and hate a little less and do a little better job than you did a year ago. How much money are you pumping back into yourself and your future? It's worth thinking about. And finally, the strangest secret. At the beginning, I said, what makes a child grow up into the human being he becomes? Well, this is the reason for that. Of course, he's the confluence of a genetic pool that goes back for thousands and thousands of years. His environment has an influence on him, of course. But what makes him become the person he becomes is that he becomes what he thinks about most of the time. It's as simple as that. We become what we think about most of the time. And that's the strangest secret. This is why thinking is so vital. This is why a goal is so important. Because we will become that. This is why people who set goals achieve them. The trouble with men is not in achieving their goals. They do that. It's in establishing them. Well, that's about it. I think it's good to remember that if we just go along with the crowd, we won't wind up with much more than the wish that we could do it all over again, and as far as we know, you can't. If we want to amount to anything as individuals, we need individual goals, individual thinking, individual actions, and we must never conform to the big group. We must love them, we must help them, we must serve them, because our whole success will depend on our ability to do these things. But never lose our own individuality and our identity by permitting ourselves to become submerged in what has historically proved itself to be little more than a suffocating sea of indirection and purposelessness. If we want to emulate someone, fine, but let's be choosy in whose steps we follow. It's the only life we've got. And remember to think. Imagination is everything, and we can become what we can imagine. If you find yourself getting depressed and down at the mouth, as we all get once in a while, you might want to remember this quotation by Dean Briggs. He said, "Do your work. Not just your work and no more, but a little more for the lavishing's sake. That little more which is worth all the rest. And if you suffer as you must, and if you doubt as you must, do your work. Put your heart into it, and the sky will clear. And then out of your very doubt and suffering will be born the supreme joy of life." Believe it or not, in an age when we've come to nearly deify leisure time, we've almost lost sight of the fact that virtually all our satisfactions, rewards will come not from our leisure, but from our work. And don't forget the strangest secret. We become what we think about.